Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse. This is Season 3, Episode 22. Today is Monday, May the 30th, 2016. My name is Graham Perro. With me tonight, as usual, is Melissa Daphne. Tyler Fitch is currently on a plane, probably somewhere near Denver, actually. He's flying from, I believe, from Philadelphia to Portland on his way back from a visit to NCAA Lacrosse Weekend in Philadelphia, or in the Philadelphia area anyway. And so hopefully he was going to join us and give us a bit of a rundown on the lacrosse games that happened there, but the timing worked out didn't work out, so he can't join us tonight. So hopefully next weekend he can tell us about the games that he saw there. As for tonight, we only have the one game to talk about, which was obviously Saskatchewan and Buffalo this past weekend in Buffalo. Finals. Greater Toronto area. I had the fortune of being able to go to the game, so that was awesome. Thanks to Steve Bermel from the Bandits for getting me tickets, as he frequently does, and that was great.
So jealous, so jealous, so jealous.
Yeah, we were talking about this before the show. The fact that I live obviously less than an hour from the ACC, so I can see Toronto games. It's a little over an hour to Buffalo, so I can see Bandits games. And if I want to make the really long jaunt to Rochester, that's about 3 hours. So if you're looking for a good place to live for lacrosse, this is not bad. Yeah, so I was lucky enough to get to Buffalo for that game, and what a game it was! It was really exciting. Back and forth, great goaltending. The defense was outstanding on both sides. I mean, we expected the defense to be great for Saskatchewan because they've been known for that for 3-4 years now. But Buffalo's defense played really well. Both teams played great on transition. It's funny how you can say both goalies were really good and both offenses were really good at the same time, but that's kind of how it worked. I mean, everybody was at the top of their game, and it was just really exciting. Dane Smith did not score like 9 points or 10 points or something crazy like that, like he's done a number of times this season, but he was still somebody that the Rush obviously needed to watch for.
Yeah, 6 points. He was quiet.
For him, it was, yeah. But if you're focusing on Smith, then of course they've got Ryan Benesh and they've got Mark Stanhouse and the rest of the gang there too. I thought Alex Quito-Hill had a really good game. He was my vote. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. He was my vote for Transition Player of the Year. And another Bandit that I wanted to mention was Mitch Desnew, who really hasn't gotten a lot of talk for Rookie of the Year. I'm not sure he really should be in the top 5, top 3 kind of thing for Rookie of the Year, given the rookies that we're playing this year. But he's a really smart defender. Played a really good game. I like watching him. But like I said, with all the high scoring offensive players from Georgia and Wes Berg and Graham Hossack in Rochester and Chad Tutton down in Georgia as well, there's all kinds of rookies. So even a player as good as Mitch Desnew is going to get, I don't want to say ignored, but I wouldn't know if I'd put him in the top 3. But in any case, I thought he played a good game.
But especially if you're talking about a rookie defender, I think they're going to make less noise than an offensive player. I think that's the nature of the beast. So the fact that he's a defender instead of an offense guy, I think he would have really had to shine to outdo any of the guys that are in those top 3 spots.
Right. Yeah, and you're hearing a lot about Graham Hossack in Rochester from people who really know the game, and I myself as one of those. But yeah, there's a lot of people who are talking about Hossack as being certainly one of the better defenders on the Nighthawks, and they have a pretty good defensive team. But just a player who stepped into his first year in the league and looked like a seasoned vet because he just makes smart plays. And guys like Chad Tutton is in there as well. He scores a little more than Hossack because he's more of a transition guy. And I think Desnu is kind of there as well. But you're right, he doesn't get the big number, so he doesn't get the recognition that a guy like Randy Stotts is getting. Anyway, I'm yammering on about the game. What did you think?
This was an awesome game. This is the kind of game you want for the championship. This was back and forth, edge of your seat. You have no idea. I mean, I really thought this was going to go to overtime. I was actually more shocked that we actually had a final score when that final buzzer went. I was like, wait, no, this game needs to go to overtime. What are you talking about? But I don't know if in Buffalo's mind they also thought it was going to go to overtime, and so they kind of stepped back just a little bit to prepare for that possibility, because something happened those last 5 minutes or so, and they just kind of, they almost looked like they fell apart a little bit. And then the Rush just were like, oh, hey, this game's ours now, and they kind of stepped in and took it away and won. But up until, the last 10 minutes or last 5 minutes even of that fourth quarter, it was anybody's game. I mean, first quarter, Rush were winning. Second quarter, it was tied. Third quarter, it was tied. And then you had the fourth quarter. And it was like, that was going to be it. And it was exciting. It was back and forth. There wasn't a whole lot of penalties or even really skirmishes. It was nice to see that the refs were keeping control without trying to micromanage the game, because that can cause its own issues, and sometimes that can just be a frustration because you feel like they're trying to control the outcome of the game instead of just trying to control that tempo. But this was exciting. This was exactly what you want in a championship game. It's, since we have that potential of a 3-game series, if the next game and potentially the next 2 games are like this one, this is going to be a true treat for the fans. If next week is very one-sided, not so much. But we have seen a few championship cup games within the past 5 years that were very dominant with one side, and the other side just didn't seem to show up, or it was very dominant one half, and then they flipped and the other team was dominant and ended up winning. So to see one that was just 2 teams just battling like this was their last chance. I mean, in this 3-game series, you would almost have thought this was game 3, the way they were playing, not game 1. It was exciting. It's just exactly what you want in a championship game. I don't think there's much else you can say. It was good offense. It was good defense. It was good goaltending. Neither team was really making a lot of mistakes for the other teams to capitalize. A lot of the goals that did go in were those really tough ones. Like there was one, it was the 3rd goal from Buffalo with Ryan Benesh scored it. And it, like you talk about those threading the needle shots, and it was just one of those because the goalie had like this itty bitty amount of space, and you couldn't even see it, and it was like the ball just went through there, and it was like, holy cow, how did he score? And that's the kind of game it was. It was so exciting. It was so much fun. I'm so jealous that you got to go, Graham, because that's the kind of game you want to be at. Like that's the kind of game you want for a championship. It was awesome. Loved it.
Absolutely. And the fact that it was in Buffalo made it even better. I wrote an article on my blog a couple of weeks ago about the game day experience, or the lacrosse anyway experience in Toronto versus in Buffalo. And I love my Rock, and I'm not giving up my Rock season tickets anytime soon. But the flow for a lacrosse game is just so much fun. And I've seen a number of games in Buffalo now over the last 15 years or so. And I think last night, Saturday night, was the loudest I've ever seen it. It was, I mean, this is before the game started, it was getting loud. And of course, every Bandits goal, they play this really loud horn, but the crowd was loud enough that the horn really didn't make much of a difference. It did get quiet near the end of the 4th when Saskatchewan took the lead, and then it sort of became, this would have to really work their butts off if they wanted to get the back into it, and they never managed to do that. But the fact that it was really close throughout made the experience that much more fun. just because Buffalo wasn't running away with it. Saskatchewan wasn't running away with it. The Bandits were definitely in the game until the very, very end. So it's just a lot of fun seeing a game in Buffalo. And I agree, the refs managed to keep control. Nobody lost their minds. Now that could certainly have been the coaching as well. The coaches say to the players, "We are not taking stupid penalties tonight. We are not taking retaliatory penalties tonight. We need everybody on the floor, and spending time in the box, spending time killing penalties and stuff is just not worth it. We don't need that, so don't do it." And there were 5 penalties in the entire game. Both teams for keeping it together.
Well, and we had 2 power play goals out of those 5. So Buffalo did benefit from Edmonton taking those penalties, but it's not like we've seen where there is a bunch of penalties and you keep seeing power play on a lot of the goals. So both teams played smart, which
actually I just looked that up. Each team had 2 power play goals. So out of the 5 penalties, there were 4 power play goals.
Oh yeah, I did miss the rushes.
That's interesting. So they had 3 in the second, and Saskatchewan had 1 in the third. So yes, I mean, there's only 5 penalties in the game, but special teams still had played a fairly significant part. So yeah, that's, like you said, that's exactly what you want from a championship game. You want something that's close and something that's exciting and comes right down to the wire, and that one pretty much did. For something similar in Saskatchewan next weekend. Okay, so obviously there's only one game to talk about. So another thing we wanted to address briefly, we were talking about this after the show last week. Topic to bring up this week, and that is some of the older players in the league. And then we noticed this because I happen to have a list of the top. I think I actually had a list of the top 10 oldest players in the league, and then I expanded it to 20. And found that 8 of them play for the Toronto Rock. Actually had a list. Where did it go?
Well, heck, half of them are in the top 10. So, I mean, that alone for the Rock.
So, yeah, actually, if you look at the top 10, there are 5 Toronto players on it. And so I said, okay, well, let's break this down by team and see what we have. And before we get there, let me just go through the average age of each team. I know this is a little bit off. It's not exactly accurate because this is every player who's played for the team this year. So, for example, in Calgary, I have Christian Del Bianco included there, though he played in 1 season. But he's 18, so that's going to bring the average a fair bit down. Chris Levis only played in the first 5 games for the Stealth, and then he was released, but that's going to bring the average up because he's 40. So the oldest team is the Toronto Rock, as we were just kind of talking about. Average age of 29.34, which is funny because I think the Saskatchewan Rush only have 2 people older than that. There's next at 28.5. Then Vancouver, Buffalo, and New England all around 27.5. Colorado is at 26.5. Saskatchewan is just below that at 26.43. Then Calgary at 26.3. And the youngest team, no surprise, the Georgia Swarm at 25.6. Almost a 4-year difference between the oldest team and the youngest team. 20, oldest player is John Grant. I'll just go through the top 5, say quickly. Josh Sanderson is number 2, Colin Doyle, Anthony Cosmo, and Derek Suddens. Suddens, Patrick Merrill is at number 6, and Brandon Miller is at number 7. They're all 37. Cosmo and Doyle are 38. Sanderson's 39, and John Grant is 41. So if we break it down by team, pretty young final as we look at the final 2 teams. Buffalo has 3 players in the top 20. Cosmo, Mark Stainhouse, and Chad Culp. And if we want to extend it a little bit, it looks like Billy D. Smith is about 5 months younger than Chad Culp, so not too far out of the top 20. Saskatchewan has nobody in the top 20. In fact, the oldest player is Aaron Bold, who's 31. Zach Greer is also 30, but they're the only two 30-year-olds on the whole team. So the oldest player on their team is the 44th oldest player in the league. So that's a pretty young team.
Well, and that's even extra interesting when you factor in that the Rush won last year and they pretty much had the exact same team. So that was a very young team to win last year. So
yep, their team is 26.43 years old this year. Obviously, they were 25.43 last year, discounting the differences, which were Dan Taylor and Curtis Knight. And I don't remember who they would have had to drop to bring in those two, but in any case, it's only 2-player difference. So that is a pretty young team to be winning the championship. So Buffalo has 3, Saskatchewan has nobody in the top 20. Toronto has 8, like I said before. Georgia and Calgary also have nobody in the top 20. New England has 2. Rochester has 4. The Self brothers, Scott Campbell and Dan Dawson. I guess Paul Dawson is probably pretty close because I don't remember how far apart in age Dan and Paul are, but Dan's number 17, so Paul's probably a couple of years younger than that. Colorado only has 1 player in the top 20, but he's number 1. And an interesting fact for Colorado, and I think this was an all fact of the day earlier this year, the second oldest player on Colorado is exactly 10 years younger, which is Callum Crawford. He shares a birthday with John Grant, but was born a decade later. So, yeah, Crawford is only 31, so he's not in the top 20. He might not even make the top 50, depending on how many people are in their early 30s in the league. And the other team is Vancouver, who technically have 3 in the top 20, but like we said, Chris Levis was released after 5 games this year. So they really only have 2, which would be Curtis Hodgson and Jeff Molesky. So the fact that Toronto has 8 people in the top 20 in terms of age give you an idea of why they had so many people injured this year. If you look at the top 20, Brody Merrill, I think, played every game or most of them. He's number 16. Bill Greer was out for half the year. He's number 13. Sandy Chapman missed some time. He's number 11. Casey Behrens, I think, was okay. I don't remember Behrens getting injured all that often over the course of his Rock career. That's pretty good. Brandon Miller wasn't injured, but didn't play all that well most of the time. He didn't have a great season. Patrick Merrill missed most of the year. Colin Doyle missed the last couple games, and Josh Sanderson missed the first 5 or 6 games. So other than Casey Behrens and Brandon Miller, all 8 players in the top 10 there for the Rock spent some time on the injured list this year. I wonder if that points to some changes that might be coming down for the Rock this year. Obviously, there's been talk that Sanderson is retiring, but nothing official. Colin Doyle broke his neck near the end of the season. I'd kind of be surprised if he ever plays lacrosse again. So there might be 2 sort of forced changes right there, but the team might just decide, you know what, we've had enough. We need to get younger, and there might be some significant changes there.
And it is very interesting when you think about some of these factors, because there's definitely that argument on balancing experience with youth, and you can definitely see some teams where they go one way or the other, but some teams like the Rush obviously are having a lot of success with a younger team. That experience or lack of it really isn't hurting them. That youth is kind of making up for it. And we have some just really talented players, which part of that probably grows up from watching, you know, the Gary Gates and the Dan Dawsons and even the John Grant Juniors. So they've had these really top players to emulate. And some of those divides between the outdoor and indoor seem to be getting a little smaller in some areas. Still seeing some big ones, but, you know. So it's very interesting to see that in general, most of the league actually is very young overall, except for Toronto. So yeah, I would be surprised if they're not going to make some changes. I mean, like you said, you know, I adore Colin Doyle. You know, he's one of my favorite players, but I kind of don't want to see him play next season, knowing what he did to his neck. You know, that just as a fan makes me very wary. I don't want to see him. No different than the goalie issue we talked about earlier. There are just certain injuries you just kind of need to take a little more serious. But yeah, with the combination of age and injuries, I think even if the Rock didn't cut them, I have a feeling a lot of these players are probably considering retirement anyway, because they're just at that point. Maybe young families, things like that. I don't know what the Rock's players are like. I know what Colorado's are a little bit more, but I just can't imagine they're going to want to keep doing that traveling for much longer if they're not considering it. So I think we'll see some big changes with the Rock, especially after the season, the way it went.
Yeah, that's the thing. If they had won the championship this year or even made the playoffs and sort of taken a run at the championship, they might say, well, yeah, these guys are older than a lot of players in the league, but they're getting the job done, and look at the success we've had. But considering the lack of success they had this year, and part of that was due to injury, but it'd be hard to blame them for saying, yeah, we had a totally, and half our players are over 30, and we're by far the oldest player. Well, not by far, but they're definitely the oldest team in the league, and we can't keep doing that. It's, and I think we mentioned this before, that it may be difficult for Toronto because there are a lot of players who live in this area or come from this area, and I think Brandon Miller is one of them, and probably Brody Merrill and a few others as well, who say, hey, I've done the traveling around thing. Brody Merrill has traveled all over the continent. I mean, he played for Portland and for Edmonton and for Philadelphia and for all these places. I've done my share of traveling. I'm not interested in doing that anymore. It'd be nice if I could just play for my hometown team and finish out my career here. But that means that if the Rock decide, you know what, we'd rather not have Brandon Miller on our team next year, or Brody Merrill, or one of these guys, they may not be able to trade him, because other teams know, well, Brody doesn't want to come to Colorado or to Georgia or to wherever, because he lives in Toronto. He wants to play there. So they may not be able to trade him. The only other alternative is to release him, and it's unfortunate for, I guess, I mean, it'd be unfortunate for the league if somebody like Brody Merrill were to get released at this point in his career, because he's still an excellent player. But it kind of handcuffs the Rock, in that they either keep him or release him, and deprive the rest of the league of having him in the league, and that's kind of sad. But yeah, so we'll see what Jamie Dawick decides to do, if he decides to go that route, or if he decides to keep going the way they're going. Maybe, I mean, if they lose Sanderson and Doyle, they're going to have to replace him with somebody. They can't just say, well, we'll just weather the storm. So something's got to be done there. But we'll have to wait and see what they do with some of the other players.
Yeah, well, and then kind of following up with that, it's kind of crazy to be even talking retirement in some ways, because 8 of the players are 34 years of age or older for the Rock. So 34 is still considered, I'd say, relatively youngish. I mean, granted, we had John Tavares who set that bar really high, so we have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. I mean,
yeah,
John
you can assume everybody's going to play till 46, right?
Yeah. I mean, John Gallant retired, and I think he was 36, 38, 37, somewhere in there. He was still relatively young. So, it's hard to kind of balance that. Well, no, that 34 is still pretty young. But for an athlete, 34 actually is kind of old. And so we are actually seeing quite a few of these players, even on the other teams, that are 33, 34, 35. So it is strange to be considering that Brody Merrill might be considering retirement at 34. But at the same time, everything's still feeling good, I would hope. And so maybe that's when you want to retire, instead of when you're like, oh God, I'm hurting. Why am I still doing this? So
I imagine when you're 22 and 23 and you're just finishing off the season, and you're kind of bumped up and bruised and tired, and it doesn't take you all that long to get back and just say, okay, now I'm ready to go again. I mean, you take the summer off, or you even play more lacrosse over the summer, which is what most of them do. And then by the time the training camps come around, you've had maybe the Man Cup's in September or the MLL final is in August or thereabouts. And then you've got a couple of months before the MLL training camp. That's totally good. Have some rest, get some time with the family and stuff, and then get right back into training, and you're good. When you're 34, 35, that gets harder to do. And it's amazing that John Tavares was able to do it until he was 46, but he did say, he's been saying for 5 years before he actually did retire, it takes a lot of work to to deal with those kind of injuries, and it's not even injuries, it's just day to day getting beat up on the lacrosse floor. And be able to recover from that and play again the next week and the old it is. And yeah, like we said, kudos to him for being able to do it for so long. But not everybody's able to.
Yeah, I've been amazed at how different my body reacts now than it did even 5 years ago. And I have to remind myself, hey, you're not in your 20s or early 30s anymore. So I can only imagine what it's like for these guys, that they're taking harder hits, they're putting their bodies through a whole lot more punishment, and they have to train harder. I mean, let's be honest, these guys have a very regimented training schedule. That's hard to maintain. And so I can only imagine what it's like for some of these guys, knowing what it's like for me having to tell myself, hey, you're not a young pup anymore. You need to step it back. I ran my first 5K ever earlier this year, and I'll admit I was stupid. I actually don't train for a 5K, but I'm in good shape. So I figured, hey, I could do a 5K, no problem. If I was still 20, yeah, I would have been fine. I would have been bouncing back after a day or two. No, I felt like I was 80 for almost a week. So I can imagine.
I did exactly the same thing, and I think it was 2007, 2008. I think it was 2008, which would have been I was 39, and I did the same thing. I was going to go out. My sister was running a 5K, and she was training for it. I wasn't training at all. I was going to go out, and it was a running or a walking thing. So there were a lot of people that were just walking the 5K. And I thought, okay, well, I'll start off running, and then when I get tired, I'll stop and I'll just walk the rest of it. I could walk 5K. That's no problem. And I ended up actually being able to run the whole thing because I was in reasonably good shape. And I ran the whole thing and thought, wow, that was not as difficult as I thought it was. And then I couldn't walk for the next 3 days. It was brutal. And that actually got me into running, and I started running, and I was doing it for a while, and then I got sick in 2010, and that killed that. But yeah, and trying to recover from that at 38 was difficult enough. So I can't imagine what these guys are going through, doing the same thing all the time. Now, they've also been trained athletes since they were teenagers or something, probably. But how long you train or how much you train, at some point age just catches up with you, and you just can't do it anymore. So I guess we can move on to our predictions, though we don't have any predictions to make.
Well, we can talk about whether we think we're going to have 3 games or if we think it's going to go 2. Because I think Tyler said he thought it was going to go 3. I think that's what he put out on Twitter. Was that he thought?
Yes, he actually said Rush in 3. He predicted Buffalo would win game 1, and then the Rush would come back and win the next 2. So he got that part wrong. We'll see if he gets the series prediction right, whether the Rush take it in 2 or if Buffalo takes game 2. I picked the Rush to win the series. I didn't give a number of games as to how long it would take the Rush to win, whether they would win it in 2 or 3. If I were to give a number of games, I probably would have said 3. Seeing as they've won the first one and now they're going home to their jam-packed, really loud stadium instead of the other jam-packed, really loud stadium, I'd probably go with the Rush in 2. I think the Rush will finish it off this weekend, which is kind of sad for Buffalo. You got like Anthony Cosmo has been in the league for 15 years or something like that, and he's got 2 rings, so he's not like he's never been to the final, but I don't think he played in the final. He was a backup for Whipper for 2001, 2002, or 2000. 2 and 3, I guess it would have been 2001 they lost. So it'd be nice to see him win a championship as a starter. But I don't think it happens this year. I'm going to go with the Rush in 2. What do you think?
I chose Buffalo, but as I said, I'm cheering the Rush. I want the Rush to win, but I kind of thought Buffalo. I'm kind of torn now. I'm kind of with you. I think the Rush really stepped it up, and they're going to go back to their hometown with their crazy fans that have really embraced them. I'm so happy to see what Saskatchewan has done. I actually am kind of thinking the Rush might take it in too. So I picked Buffalo to begin with, and I'm kind of thinking I'm going to be the one that's wrong out of the three of us, which, yay, Rush! But at the same time, like you said, there's a lot of players on Buffalo. Like I like Chad Culp. He was a former Mammoth player. I'd love to see him get his first ring. I don't know that it's going to happen this season, which is kind of sad because I think this is one of the best Buffalo teams I have seen, and I think they've really thrived under the new coaching. And so to see them doing so well, I do kind of want to see them succeed as well. So I'm kind of torn there because I like the Rush and kind of liking this Buffalo team. I just don't know if Buffalo has it. And the main reason I'm saying that is the way they fell off at the end of the fourth quarter when they really needed to play tight, and all of a sudden they kind of fell apart. I don't know if they do have it in them compared to this Rush team. So I'm really excited for next week. I won't be surprised at all if we do have to have 3 games to decide this, but I'm not going to be surprised if the Rush take it in 2 as well. So,
all right. Well, in my the IL Indoor people are doing game by game predictions, and so far I'm 5-1, I believe, in the playoffs. So if I pick Edmonton to win this weekend, or there I go. Somebody had to say Edmonton. Saskatchewan to win this weekend, and they win it. That's 6-1 in the playoffs, which is far better than I think I was 41-40 in the regular season. So just managed to squeak over 500, but I'm kicking it in the playoffs, so that's cool.
Hey, just like some of these teams, playoffs are what counts, right? So if you don't do as well during the regular season, just turn it on in the postseason.
Just
doesn't matter.
Do well enough to get into the playoffs, and then it's a whole new thing. All right, well, hopefully we'll have all 3 of us available next week, because it might be our last show of the year, depending on what happens in the game, obviously. Yeah, so we'll see you then. This has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For the absent Tyler and for Melissa, I'm Graham. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Let's press the right button.